All right. Yesterday, I wanted to introduce to you the underpinnings of why we start to practice yoga or where it came from. And so the two texts that I'm going to pull from quite often are the Hatha Yoga Pradikapa and the Yoga Sutras. Take what you want, leave the rest, and if it doesn't resonate, so what? So we talked yesterday a lot about this state of Samadhi. So the first chapter in the Yoga Sutras is completely a context of how to reach Samadhi, absorption, curiosity, enthrallment. And he says in the text, for anybody, for even the less evolved people. So he's trying to explain something that is almost unexplainable. And I talked about the Samkhya philosophy where there is, what ends up happening is we mix up the pure for the impure. I start to look at my body and think that it will forever be this way when really it is changing. I start to look at my friends and my family as a certain way, and they're always changing. So when I mix up the pure with the material world, I get confused and I get in illusion and I get into suffering. So the whole practice of yoga is to separate the two so that I can live more highly aligned with a state of drastu. So remember, drastu comes from the word drishti. So drishti is my gazing point, and drashtu is the seer, is the watcher. And I want to live in that place. They say that through a meditation practice, you get 3 extra seconds before you react. And how I view that is almost like I'm in a video game and I'm able to watch Erin and I get to decide like a choose your own adventure. Like what do you want, Erin? Like what's the karmic play out of this? What is the end goal that you're looking for? So we talked about this idea, the first couple yoga sutras that say that yoga happens when we calm our minds. When we are no longer driven, motivated by the constant turning fluctuations of thought. And then once yoga happens, we can abide in our true splendor. So again, that's pretty fancy and it sounds like really pretty and it might be a nice bumper sticker, but what the heck does it even mean? You know, like these philosophies are great, but if it doesn't make sense to you, it's not that great. So to abide in my true splendor is when I forget for a second my sex, my job, my sexual orientation, my worries, my traumas, when for a second I can let go of all that stuff that make me Erin, I'm finally free. And when Patabi Joyce would sit and he would talk after he led primary series classes, he would say, Shanti is coming. Shanti is coming. Peace is coming. So the whole objective is to find more effortlessness, this quality of limitlessness. So that magic word is Svarupe, and it means true splendor, bliss, connection, very similar to Samadhi, but it's like curiosity and engagement with the moment. So for a lot of you, you said this morning, like, I feel frustrated, I feel overwhelmed, I feel challenged, and that's awesome. In the Yoga Sutras, he says, when you feel that way, be compassionate. You know, wrap this person in your arms and say, I love you, and I'm so proud of you for showing up this morning when you felt like a fish out of water. Because it's a big deal, and every time we do something that scares us, that challenges us, that pushes us outside our box, we're building up confidence. We're building up self-esteem. So that's the beginning of our Yoga Sutras, and we're going to dive more into that later. But I want to come into this concept of a beginner's mind. So we have just opened up this container, and we're all kind of figuring out where we sit, where we stand. Do we like each other? Is this content good? So we're just kind of figuring it out. A beginner's mind is analytical, it is adaptable, it's curious, and it's available. But over time, what ends up happening is we start to kind of put the blinders on. We start to kind of narrow the scope. It's a natural thing that happens as we age and as we mature. So our objective as yogis is to try to go back to what it was like to be a beginner, to be frustrated, to be confused, to be excited, to see possibility. So a beginner is much like being a child, playful. And I apologize if anyone didn't have a wonderful childhood, because a lot of my students are like, when you say that, that doesn't resonate for me. So if it's not true for you, I do apologize. But when a kid gets lost in a Barbie doll or a truck or a coloring or setting up Lego, they're really curious, and there's no reason, there's no reward for them. They're just doing it because they're interested. And I pose the question to you, like, what in your life do you do with no expectation of a reward? So you simply do it because you love it. Because if I look through my category of human experiences and the things that I like to do, they're often driven by a reward of some sort. And I talked about this yesterday, that all of our vrittis, all of our fluctuations of thought are driven by desire. Your desires drive your whole life. You have a desire for the color red. So you buy a red shirt and a red pillow and red lipstick and a red cup. You are driven by cooking. So you have this big desire to start like getting more food and more cookbooks, and your desires are really important. You know, they are the spice of your life. Yet it's a slippery slope because they can so easily become an obsession. And you mistake what was once a passion for like an addiction. Like that's the only way to get there. That's the only way to get my hit of dopamine, if you will. So with our yoga practice, it always works this way. We are working, some magical beings, it isn't this way, but we're often working from the gross to the subtle. Okay, so it starts out as big movements, arms above head, palms touch. It's this big, tangible, visceral thing, and it has to be loud and it has to get our attention. So the practice of yoga, we will one day go through the 8 limbs, but I'm pretty sure you've been there, done that. We talk about this concept of socha, and socha is cleanliness. But socha, it starts from the periphery of the body and it moves to the core of the body. So I start to do my warriors, and at first I can't hold them because my thighs burn and I'm sweating. And then I build this endurance. And then all of a sudden I can now do triangle and twisted triangle, and I can now do 3 sun salutations without taking child's pose. So I'm building endurance. Then the dangling carrot of my yoga practice is my body starts to get stronger. My eyes start to be brighter. Baron Baptiste says it's like Michelangelo used to say that the marble, he had to wait till the marble spoke to him, and he just was removing whatever wasn't part of the statue. And our yoga practice naturally starts to shed the people, the substances, the habits that don't support the practice. So there has to be some commitment in the practice. Like there is a sincerity that comes along with it. There is consistency's big, and we'll talk about abhyasa later, but if I'm really flippant with my practice, I'm in, I'm out, I'm in, I'm out, it's pretty hard to gain momentum. So the dangling carrot of my practice is that now I can hold warrior 2 for 5 breaths. Now I can stand on my head. That's crazy. My eyes start to twinkle. My skin starts to shine. I'm literally Benjamin Buttoning. I'm going backward through time. I remember meeting a woman and she was in her 60s and I was in my 20s, and I was like, who are you and where did you find the well of youth? And she was a yogi, and she was definitely someone that put me on my path because I could see it in the way she walked. I could see it in her mind. I could see it in her eyes that she was like different and more alive than other adults that I had met. So the physical practices start to teach us that, like, on a very ego level, I want to stay with this practice because it makes me feel good. So that's the first element of the socha experience, the cleaning of the temple of the body. And then we go a little bit deeper into the physicality of the body, into the energetic body, the pranic body. So when we're doing pranayama techniques, and you know this, our lungs are the only part of us that breathe, right? Like I inhale, I exhale, it's just my lungs. So prana is not breath. Like it's not fair to call it breath because prana flows in my toes, in my fingers, in my forehead, and they call them nadis. So nadis are little rivers in the body. I often think about them like kind of veins and blood vessels and capillaries, and they're everywhere. And the biggest river is the Sushumna Nadi. So it's known as the gracious channel. And it is from the pelvic floor. So we've got the mouth of the Sushumna Nadi, which is Mula Bandha. I'm pulling energy up through Mother Earth, and I'm plugging it up my central channel all the way to the tip of my head, which is how I connect with grace. Now, again, I am not of a religious bent, but I am definitely, when I step on my yoga mat, I always say, clear me. Like, get rid of my stuff so that I can be more present and more kind. So I am attuning my antenna to bigger picture, to not my tiny little dramas of being Erin, but something so much more than that, like that I can connect with you and I can see you and I could love you. But when I'm tangled up in my own drama, it's almost impossible for me to meet my friends, my students, my family members. So we purify these energy channels by twisting and bending backward and standing on our hands. And there then starts to be more vibrancy in the physical body, right? Instead of just a warrior 2, it's that quality, that unnameable quality of someone that's really freaking talented. So if you think about a ice skater, Kurt Browning, what a legend. If you think about a musician, a painter, a drummer, a dancer, a poet, someone who makes art even, there's something about them that we can't quite explain, right? It's like they make it look so easy and they're so themselves. And that is the pranic cleaning that happens after we move a little bit from the gross and the obvious to the not so obvious. Everything is energy, okay? So I am energy, the floor is. One of you yesterday was talking about the vibrancy. Yeah, it might have been you, Marianne, about how things vibrate. So everything vibrates, and it's kind of cheesy, and I apologize if you love it, but it's like, find your vibe, find your tribe, or whatever that saying is. But there's definitely a way that you feel around certain people. And some people can't quite understand why. But that's what I'm talking about. It's the way somebody lights a room up and they don't have to say anything. And that's pranic, and that's like vibrancy, and that is life. It's beyond the warrior twos, and it's beyond the silly handstands. It's like this, like how moths are attracted to light. I know some of you have heard me say this, but the idea of a guru. So a guru can be said to take somebody from the dark to the light. And my teacher explained it like if you had a parachute and we were all holding corners of the parachute and there was a bunch of little marbles and they were floating all around this parachute. And then we put a bowling ball in it, and the bowling ball is weighted. So all the little marbles go toward that weighted one, that guru, that bowling ball. So what I'm saying is you're all bowling balls. And I mean it. It's like you want to be a yoga teacher. You signed up for this, and it is a big responsibility. Why is it a big responsibility? Because it's all about the embodiment of being weighted. Being weighted when you feel frustrated. Staying when you don't feel like staying. Showing up when your heart is broken, when you're dealing with grief, when you're dealing with a physical ailment. So, and that weight comes from the consistency of practice. It shows up in the physical manifestation of the yoga when you see somebody and there's this grace about them. And even though they're doing inversions, they look really grounded. Like they look like a tree upside down. Handstand translates as Adho Mukha Vrikshasana, which is upside down facing tree, which is exactly that. It's like you want to get so steady that life happens and life does what she does, right? She takes your mother. She gives you breast cancer. Your whole town shuts down. These are things that life does. And as yogis, can we weather those storms? Because if I'm just doing gymnastics, who cares if Erin can do a stupid handstand? I want to know if Erin can wake up after she's dealing with so much grief and still be there for her son and her mom and her friends and her students. So the pranic cleaning happens naturally. And this is where there is no pressure on you to be anything, because this is what happens. I think it could have been maybe Trista, you said trusting the process. And that's so beautiful. When you said that, I got chills, because that's it, right? It's like we show up because there is no better way. And it will naturally happen. No pressure. You know, Nods, you said, I want this physical stuff to click. And it's like inside of you, you know it will. Inside of you, you're like, I trust it. I'm staying. It's not easy, but I'm staying. And then the final element of the cleansing process. So again, we're always through yoga. For me personally, and I think Marianne, you alluded to this too, about the physical side of it. For me, it was physical. It really is still physical, but we're moving from the gross to the subtle. And the very, very, very subtle, which is wild, is mining and weeding your mental garden. And that is really, really challenging, because we've got these thoughts that are so deeply rooted in our brains. From the age of 6, someone said, you're not very smart. You're really pretty, but you're not very smart. So then forever, you're like, okay, well, I'm either going to prove that person wrong, or I'm going to be really pretty. And that's one example, but it could have been like, you can't make money, or you're not whatever enough. And so we want to go inside and we want to rip those roots out. We want to create new patterns of thought. And this is what every neuroscientist, every therapist, every shaman, every healer is trying to do, is to teach us how to weed the mental garden. So that's all the like when we're talking about those vrittis, those fluctuations of thought, that's exactly what we're talking about. So in the Yoga Sutras, so this is the Samadhi Pada, this is the first chapter, and you could read it like first, fourth, third, second. There's no pattern rhythm to it. So he says, he tells us what the causes of fluctuations in thought are. So this is Sutra 5 to 11. You don't need to know that, but later on you might have like an opportunity to be like, well, that's Sutra 1.7. And so first of all, he says that all of our thoughts either come from our desires. So it's like, I want somebody to notice me today. I'm going to do my hair really pretty. I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something really nice for someone because I want to be recognized today. So that's a desire. Another desire could be, I want to learn something. So I pick up my textbook and I'm learning. I'm going to sign up for this course because I want to learn and I want to grow. So all of our thoughts and our whole lives are driven by our desires. If you have children, if you know children, you'll know that they have an inclination a certain way. And I think that's in them when they're born. Like I only have one child, but I also have a sister and we're so different. And I believe that it's kind of this imprint of your preferences and your aversions. So this is an interesting thing, and we'll go more deeply into this later on. And they're known as the kleshas. And I've come to call them the forces of corruption. So they're the things that happen inside my brain that take me from a clear, pure mind into a distracted, messy, confused mind. So the kleshas, and I'll tell them to you in English, and we will dive into this in Sanskrit, but I find them super interesting. The first is the birthplace of all of it, which is ignorance. And so this movement toward Black Lives Matter, finally, love is love movement, this is all about how ignorant we are and we don't even know it. And so when someone points something out at me where I've been ignorant, yeah, at first I'm embarrassed. And then afterwards, I'm so grateful because we've been living in this time where we're super ignorant to what's happening in the world. But ignorance could show up as believing that somebody who works at a coffee shop is a certain way. Somebody who works in a museum is a certain way. Somebody that is a certain ethnicity is a certain way. So ignorance is kind of like our prejudice, or we just don't know that we have them. And I thought I didn't have any. And then I was like, well, let's just see this, Erin. Why don't you write down all the things you think you know about the world? And it was riddled with prejudice and opinions and judgment. And again, in the sutras, he says, be kind, though, because it's really normal. It's really normal to think women are this way, men are this way, people that are androgynous are this way. Like, it's pretty normal. The mind categorizes it. It does that. But we're going counterculture. We want to stop that, because if I think women are a certain way, then when I look at you, all I see is that women are this way. Women are nurturing and women are this and women are that. But then I can't see you. I can't really see who you truly are. So the next is attachment to pleasure. And take a moment and think about that. Like, what are you attached to, drawn to, driven by that gives you pleasure? Food, sex, alcohol, television, exercise. And this is the slippery slope. So we call that Raja, and we're going to see this word a lot. So remember, Raja Kapotasana is king pigeon. Raja is the royal path, but this particular Raja, it actually translates as color. Sometimes it's described as the color red. And it's this yearning, this like passion, this drive. And it's really beautiful because it'll point you where you want to go in life. But again, it can so easily become all you focus on, right? So I could so easily, what I love about the Ashtanga practice is if it were my choice, I would probably just do handstands the whole time. Like I would never do a back bend and I would never do a forward fold. So primary series to me, like I have to do these poses that I actually really don't like. And that's the point. The point of your practice is to sort of rub you the wrong way. It's sort of to make you watch your personality say, oh God, my hips are so tight. Well, you know what? I'm not going to do it then because like my hips aren't open and I'm a runner and that's just the way it is. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm sorry, I'm not trauma sensitive, but I've been through a lot of trauma and this is just my experience, is I want to meet Erin and I want to see her when she is competitive and I want to love her anyway. And I want to see her when she is weak and sad and feeling like a loser and I want to love her anyway. And I want to see all the beautiful facets of my humanity on the mat. And then I want to be equanimous about it. I want to be like, oh, there she is again. Oh yeah. Okay. Oh, your hips are tight. Okay. I don't like this. Okay. But what if you just did something you didn't like? What if you just did something that you didn't love, but you were equanimous, neither for nor against? And that's the point I said yesterday about Rumi and every human is a guest house. Because if I followed my whim, if you followed your whim and you woke up and you didn't feel like being a parent or a partner or a teacher, like nothing would get done. And again, I say this, but we are like, I'm preaching to the choir. I know you're with me on this, but like it's showing up. It's showing up. I had this car accident. I dislocated my elbow, shattered my arm bone. I know I'm not alone, tore a hamstring, and I showed up. And it wasn't pretty, and it was painful, and I could do like 5 minutes of yoga, but I showed up. And I showed up because this magic carpet is the closest I've ever been to God, to curiosity, to freedom. It's the only thing really that makes sense to me, or it helps me make sense of that world. So the third is our aversions to pain. So anything you don't like. And so just take a moment, think about what you don't like. I don't love the color, whatever color. I don't love eggplant. I don't love doing my taxes. I don't love filling up my car with gas. I don't like family vacations. Whatever it is, just take a moment, think about the things that you do not like. You are strong, and even in your yoga mat, like what don't you like? And the reason this is so important is I would say 90% of the world designs their life to avoid what they don't like, what doesn't bring them pleasure. I've spent my 38 years avoiding conflict. Pretty much. I'm like, oh, whatever. Yeah, fine. I'll deal with that. I just will not have that conversation. So for me, hating conflict is impacting my life in a massive way. I'm not quite ready to deal with it yet, but that for me is a really big deal. When I avoid what I don't like, when they aren't exactly as I want them to be. You know, like what happens when I'm having a difficult conversation with somebody and I am so averse to it, I can't be present. So do you see, like when we have like preferential treatment to asana, it's like, well, I like warrior two, but I don't like twisted triangle. It's like saying, I love Trista, but I don't really like Eliza. We don't do that. We should never have preference. It's natural, but we want to learn to avoid the preferential treatment. Why? Because in Twisted Triangle, there's a lot of learning and information for you. You get to learn about how you are when you're not good at something, when your body feels tight, when you feel tired. The next one is, I find it really fascinating, and it's the ego. So it's called asmita, and it is this sense of I couldn't be here in front of you if I didn't have an ego, and you couldn't be in front of me if you didn't. Self-esteem is really important. But this is the slope of it. Okay, so I don't know if you've ever been teaching yoga or gone to something where you were the expert, and then somebody, I don't know, Jasmine, maybe in class one day, a really good photographer came in and shared some information, or said like, well, my teacher does it this way. Or like, their practice is better than your practice, or whatever. There could be an immediate like, oh, I'm such a loser. I know nothing. I'm such a loser. Why am I doing this? I'm not good at this at all. She's so much better than me. That's the underbelly of the ego. And it neither are better or worse than the other. So don't assume that when someone is like a peacock, they're any worse than someone who is like, I'm the worst. There's no scale of it. They're the exact same thing. So the ego says, immediately shuts down. Like somebody shows up and they've got this like beautiful practice, or they're an incredible parent or an incredible cook or teacher. And you're like, oh my God, I suck. That's one side. Then the other side of it is this like big, boisterous, big, bold ego. I'm the best. And both are bad because they lead us to suffering. We know this. The underpinning of everything. We are creatures of action. I said this before. We act. But everything I do creates another reaction in the world. So I want to become aware of when I'm doing that thing I tend to do where I shrink and I get minute when I feel like somebody is better than me. So in the Yoga Sutras, he says, when somebody is virtuous, so when somebody is moral or talented or gifted, celebrate it. You know, like more and more often, because understand that jealousy is super normal. Envy is super normal. But the reason we want to become conscious of it is it's going to just pull you into suffering, right? It gets you back on that wheel of you're not good enough. And it's because your mom didn't love you enough. And it's this perpetual thing that keeps us stuck. And the whole reason why we practice and teach yoga is, well, I believe is like, we want to make the world a better place, as cheesy as it sounds. But if I can make one person smile or have like a break from their intense world for a second, I think that's a job well done. Then the last piece, and they say that this is the hardest amongst any of the great sages, and it's this clinging to life. And I often explain it like if you've ever had an accident, let's say like you were in a plane and the plane was like really shaky and you thought that the plane was going to go down, you might then forever be afraid of travel. If you were walking in a back alley and someone robbed you, you might be really fearful of walking in the dark and alleys. And so this is how we presume that because it happened before, it's going to happen again. And that's not true at all. But that's just the way the human brain works. And it worked 500 years ago because that we had to. What if we ate that berry and died like our dad did? But now it's not like that. But the brain has not evolved to where we are consciously. So take a moment and reflect on that. Like, has there been an experience of friendship, love, your physical health, where you started to form these opinions about what is safe and what is not safe. I know it's a lot of information. And again, take what you want, leave the rest, and just let her go. So those are the 5 kleshas, and they're known as, I think of them as like the things that corrupt me. And sometimes I can pick up on them like, oh, there's my ego. You're cute. You're cute. You're good, Erin. Oh, there's your preference. Ooh, I see you only want sugar and coffee and handstands. Okay. So then going back, that's from the second pada of the sutras, but I just think it's a nice little reference point. So back to the first pada of the way that our mind flips on itself. And these are the 5 ways. And okay, and so they can either be afflicted and painful, or they can be non-afflicted and non-painful. Okay, so there are 2 sides to them. So the first is valid. So somebody that we respect told us. We have direct perception of it. It had happened to us. This idea that when there's smoke, we know there's a fire somewhere. So by inference, like I saw it, so I know. And then the next is, I think I said this already, but direct experience and testimony from people we love. Okay. So my vrittis, my fluctuations of thought happen because, ooh, I heard it. I saw it. I believe it. Somebody told me about it. So that's the first way that the mind starts to kind of turn. The second is we make a mistake. So there's that term, and in the Buddha's brain, he says, like, you mistake the rope for a snake. You know, and how often does this happen to you? Like, someone doesn't text you back, so all of a sudden you're like, they hate me. Oh my God, they never liked me in the first place. Why would they like me? I don't even like me. So you make up a story. You mistake something for something it is not. The brain does that. It does it. It does it with a rope and a snake. It does it all day long. It does it with people and relationships in your yoga practice. The third is fantasy, or like a concept like a unicorn or a Sasquatch, but it's like our fantasies, right? Whether our fantasy is to be on a big stage speaking, or our fantasy, it could be sexual, or it could be professional, or it could be to drive a pink Mercedes-Benz like Nicki Minaj. But it's like this fantastical world where we're like dreaming and scheming up ideas. The fourth is sleep. And I almost don't mention it because I don't think you can control it, but your mind does not reach a state of samadhi, of like, of curiosity when you're sleeping. Like, it's still working. Your brain is still thinking. Isn't that crazy? You're unconscious and your mind is still like, well, I'm going to make up dreams. Oh my God, your house is going to be on fire. And then you're going to have to get a bunch of firemen. And like, the brain, it is wild. And then lastly, and this is a really big one, is memories. So this is, like I was saying, about if something bad happened to you once upon a time, you might assume that that is the way the world is, and it's always going to be that way. You could be sitting in easy seat and you are thinking of all the other times you sat in easy seat and how your hips are tight. The reason that's a problem is that every day your body's different. So for me to go, oh my God, I hate lotus. It's so hard. It hurts so much. I am not allowing the present moment to be there because I've already decided I hate lotus. My body's tight. It's gonna hurt. So part of it in your asana practice, you get to meet this every day. You get to say, okay, Erin, you hate back bends. Why? Like, does it actually hurt? And what if you just like for a second thought you loved it? Because the mind is such an amazing little matrix that it's like full of trickery and games. So those are the 5 ways that the mind turns on itself. And I won't get into this yet. I'll probably talk about this tomorrow, which I think is so freaking cool, but it's what the mind does, but we'll talk about that tomorrow because it's just so good. Does anybody have any questions about any of that before I move forward? I'll unmute you. You never need to say anything.